I'd like to offer a simple model for what causes human suffering. You could say that there is the subject, or the sense of being a you, back here somewhere, inside. It might feel like it's inside your head, it might feel like it's inside your body, or slightly behind your eyes. And then there is the objective world out there, what is actually happening. And between the two, there's a veil, a sort of interface. And that is what we perceive to be reality. That interface has some qualities. It's heavy. It feels like struggle. It feels like something we have to manage. We have to get the conditions in that interface world just right so that we can get a little bit of respite, so that we can stop suffering. So we feel this ongoing push and pull at life. We might describe it as desire and aversion, to put it in Buddhist terms. We might describe it as struggle. We might describe it as driving with the brakes on, hesitation, seeking. But it's this ongoing sense that I have to manage my life. I have to set up conditions just right so that I can stop suffering, so I can find what I need, so that I can avoid what hurts me. This interface world is dynamic, but it's dynamic in a way that requires ongoing effort. It requires us to struggle against ultimately ourselves to keep that interface going, to keep that interface in place. This is kind of like quicksand. The harder we struggle, the deeper we sink. And it's laden with thought. The more we try to think our way out of the problem, the more in the problem we are. The more we try to push thoughts away, the more entrapped in thoughts we get. Another aspect of this interface is that it feels personal. It feels like you. And in one sense, the more we suffer, the more personal everything feels. And the more we feel like we want to hide it, even from ourselves. So there's a shame body that gets built up around this. If you've been in this game a while, you've been to this channel or watched some non-duality videos, or you're Buddhist, then you are familiar with this. You know the nature of suffering, of your own suffering, of personal suffering, and you sense that there's a way out of it, or a way to live without being bound to this suffering, to this interface, this persona, this false world of struggle. So in this model I'm describing, the way out is to recognize that this is a false paradigm, that the entire mechanism of struggle, of pushing and pulling on what seems like the external world, and never really looking close at the subject, what I take myself to be, is an activity that really gets us nowhere. It only justifies its own existence. So this is why I often recommend looking into who or what you actually are as a starting place, and not accepting any thought answer as the ultimate answer. This doesn't mean we need to avoid thoughts or push thoughts away. It simply means that a thought can never really tell you what you are. A thought can't really point back to the experience of being you as you are just now, which is not contingent upon any thought. It does not need a thought to define it. You do not need a thought to recognize I am. Once this is realized, it becomes clear that even if the interface is functioning, if the thoughts are functioning, seeming to create a self and other paradigm, seeming to create a world that you have to manage somehow, you can see that that's just movement of mind. There's nothing really to seek. There's nothing really to push away. It's all been thoughts the whole time. And the sense of I, or the sense of pure being, is unperturbed by any of it. And that's just the first step. Because even after that initial shift, that realization, which is quite profound, the sense of there being an interface doesn't immediately go away. You can get fooled by this and become satisfied enough where you don't continue to look around and see what's real, what's not real, what's extra, what's unnecessary in my experience. What am I holding on to? What am I identifying with? But if you're willing to ask these questions, you can look deeper into experience, into reality, and dissolve the remaining perceptual distortions that create the sense of this interface actually existing at all. And one of the low-level functions or basic functions of this interface that is usually not obvious after an initial awakening is that it creates the sense that there is something on each side of that interface, that there is a subject on this side looking through that interface, through that persona, through that world. And on the other side, there's a world. There's whatever ultimate reality is. Sometimes we spiritualize it and call it a ground of being, but ultimately it's a perception. It's a perception of duality, of fundamental duality that exists in reality. This false paradigm will dissolve if we continue to look into the distorting nature of thought, specifically the sense of being a subject to objects. With this insight, the entire paradigm of having an interface with the world, even if it feels somewhat unreal after awakening, dissolves. It's impossible to have an interface with anything because there are not two things anywhere. There is no inside or outside. There's no space in which anything happens. Everything that happens immediately here now. The intimacy is complete. It doesn't mean that there aren't remote experiences. It means something far more radical. That remote also means immediately here now. Space and time do not exist. Although this is a more subtle realization often than initial awakening, it is radical in its implications, and it's irreversible. We don't start believing in space and time again once we've seen through the paradigm of subject, object, time, space, and form. We see that those were all mental constructs the whole time. With this, things get very clear, very light, and they look very different. We're freed up to deeply enjoy the flow of appearances, arriving from nowhere, departing to nowhere, and ultimately existing nowhere, but at the same time, deeply intimate, radically here. This is true simplicity and innocence. This is reality expressing as one footstep, one flower, one movement of the hand, no interface, no barrier, no subject or object, no inside or outside, nothing to push or pull on. Body, world, universe functioning as one seamless doing